Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you tales of love, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. Today's story takes us on an emotional journey of a family torn apart by betrayal and rediscovering each other through hope and perseverance. As secrets unravel and courage shines through, they learn that even in the darkest times, love can heal and rebuild what was once lost. Stay with us as we dive into a tale filled with heartache, redemption, and the ultimate triumph of family. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories and join us as we begin today's heartfelt journey. Ethan Hayes stood at the towering window of his office on the 40th floor of the Hayes Corporation building in Chicago. The city sprawled below him, alive with energy, cars honking in traffic, pedestrians bustling along sidewalks, neon signs flickering on as the evening crept closer. To an outsider, Ethan was the epitome of success. His tailored suit hung perfectly on his tall frame, his sharp features exuding confidence. He was the man who had built an empire from the ground up, a symbol of ambition and resilience. But inside, Ethan was hollow. On the polished walnut desk behind him sat a single object that disrupted the otherwise modern and meticulous decor of his office, a silver-framed photograph of a woman. Madison Hayes, or Maddie, as he had called her, had dark, flowing hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets of joy and love. Her smile, radiant and full of life, was a sharp contrast to the man Ethan had become. It had been 10 years since that fateful day. The day Maddie's car skidded off the icy road on her way back from a weekend retreat. The accident had been swift and merciless, leaving Ethan a widower at just 32. He remembered the funeral clearly, every agonizing detail of it, the sympathy in the eyes of friends, the hollow condolences, the rain soaking through his coat as he stood by her grave. Time, people told him, would heal. But time, he had learned, was a liar. Ethan turned back toward his desk and ran his fingers over the photo frame, his expression unreadable but his heart heavy. This simple photograph was his anchor, the one thing that connected him to the woman who had been his heart and soul. It was Maddie who had pushed him to dream bigger, who had celebrated his successes and stood by him during his failures. Without her, life had turned into a series of empty accomplishments. Each deal he closed, each milestone he achieved, felt meaningless without her beside him. Evenings were the hardest. The stillness of his penthouse apartment became unbearable, the silence so loud it seemed to mock him. Work was his refuge, his distraction. But it was never enough. Ethan's wealth bought him the luxuries of life, a collection of sports cars, a wine cellar stocked with vintage bottles, vacations in Europe, but none of it could fill the gaping void Maddie had left behind. His life had become a well-orchestrated performance, one he no longer had the energy to play. That day was no different. He had been pacing his office, going over the plans for a new acquisition, when his assistant reminded him of his dinner meeting. "The reservation is at 7:30. Mr. Hayes," she had said, her tone formal. He nodded absently, already dreading the forced pleasantries and corporate posturing that awaited him at the upscale restaurant. By the time Ethan arrived, the restaurant was buzzing with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. The maître d' greeted him with exaggerated politeness, and he was escorted to a private table where his younger brother, Victor, and a few board members were waiting. Victor was a contrast to Ethan in every way, casually dressed, charming, and disarmingly friendly. But Ethan knew better. Victor was a man who wore his charisma like a mask, hiding the scheming mind beneath. As the conversation at the table drifted into business strategies and profit margins, Ethan found himself disengaging. He swirled the wine in his glass, letting his mind wander. The same monotonous routine, he thought. Year after year. What was it all for? That was when he saw her. The waitress had approached their table with a tray of wine glasses balanced expertly in her hands. She was young, with dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail and large, expressive eyes that seemed to carry an inexplicable weight. At first, Ethan barely glanced at her. But then something caught his attention, a scar. A thin, almost imperceptible line ran along the back of her right hand. Just like the one Maddie had. His heart stopped. He blinked, thinking his mind was playing tricks on him. But the scar was unmistakable. It was in the same place. With the same shape. For a moment, the bustling restaurant faded into the background, leaving only the young waitress and the pounding of his heart. She placed the glasses on the table, her hand trembling slightly under the tray's weight. And as she looked up, their eyes met briefly. Ethan froze. The resemblance wasn't immediately obvious. But there was something hauntingly familiar about her, the way her brow furrowed slightly when she concentrated. The way her lips curved into a polite but forced smile. It was as if he were looking at a shadow of Maddie. Someone who had her essence but not quite her face. Could it be? The thought was absurd. Impossible even. And yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling. "Sir, do you need anything else?" the waitress asked softly, her voice polite but detached. Ethan opened his mouth to respond. But no words came out. He shook his head slowly, his throat dry. The waitress gave a small nod and moved on to the next table, leaving Ethan to stare after her like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Ethan." Victor's voice broke through his daze. "Are you even listening?" Ethan turned back to his brother, barely registering the words. "What?" "Yes. I'm listening," he muttered. But his eyes kept darting back to the waitress, who was now moving toward the bar. Victor followed his gaze, his expression turning curious. "What's caught your attention?" he asked with a sly grin. "Nothing," Ethan replied curtly, but his tone betrayed him. Victor smirked. But Ethan ignored him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this young woman, this waitress named Emma, as he overheard another server address her, held some connection to Maddie. The scar, her gestures, even the faint sadness in her eyes, it was all too much to dismiss as coincidence. After the dinner ended, Ethan lingered, pretending to check his phone while keeping Emma in his peripheral vision. Finally, he couldn't resist. As she passed by again, he stood abruptly, startling her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "What's your name?" She looked at him, her expression cautious. "Emma, sir." Hearing her name felt like a punch to his chest. It wasn't Maddie, but there was something in the way she said it that stirred something deep within him. "Thank you, Emma," he said, stepping aside. She nodded and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, more uncertain than he had been in years. That night, as Ethan returned to his penthouse, he couldn't let the thought go. He retrieved Maddie's photograph from his desk and stared at it, comparing her face to the fleeting image of Emma in his mind. Could it be possible? Could Maddie somehow still be alive? The rational part of him scoffed at the idea. He had been to her funeral, he had seen her body. But another part of him, the part that had never stopped yearning for her, refused to let go of the hope. It was reckless. It was irrational. But Ethan needed to know. Grabbing his phone, he dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Liam," he said when the line connected. "I need your help. I need you to investigate someone." As he hung up, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, he had something more than his grief. He had questions and a faint, impossible hope that Maddie might not be gone after all. Ethan Hayes paced the polished floors of his penthouse the following morning, the skyline of Chicago sprawling outside his window. Sleep had eluded him, and his thoughts remained consumed by Emma, the waitress with the scar and the resemblance to Maddie. Rationality told him it was impossible, but his instincts wouldn't let him dismiss it. He needed answers. Liam Carter, a former private investigator Ethan had worked with during a company scandal years ago, was efficient and thorough. Ethan trusted him implicitly. By noon, Liam was sitting across from Ethan in the living room, a tablet and notepad in hand. His appearance was as sharp as Ethan remembered, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his tailored jacket free of wrinkles. So, you want me to look into this waitress? Liam began, tapping his pen on the notepad. What's the reason? Ethan, you don't usually call me for something so personal. Ethan hesitated, unsure how to articulate his suspicions without sounding delusional. Finally, he leaned forward, clasping his hands tightly. I think she might be connected to Maddie. Liam's brow furrowed. Maddie? Ethan. She's been gone for a decade. I know. Ethan snapped, his voice sharper than intended. He sighed and rubbed his temples before continuing. But this woman, Emma, she has the same scar Maddie had. And the way she moved, the way she looked at me, it was uncanny. I can't explain it. Liam. I just need to know who she is. Liam studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'll start digging. Where does she work? Bellevue. Ethan replied. The restaurant downtown. Liam scribbled the information down. I'll see what I can find. Give me a couple of days. As Liam left, Ethan felt both relieved and restless. This wasn't just about the resemblance anymore, it was about the possibilities. If Emma truly was Maddie, or even connected to her, what had happened to her all these years? And why had she stayed away? The next 2 days dragged by. Ethan buried himself in work to distract himself. But his mind constantly wandered back to Emma. Finally, Liam called with an update. Ethan. Liam began, his tone measured. I've got some preliminary findings. And, well, things don't quite add up. Ethan's heart leapt and sank in equal measure. What do you mean? I looked into Emma Daniels. Liam said. She's been working at Bellevue for 4 years. But before that, there's no trace of her. No school records. No employment history. No medical files. It's like she didn't exist before 5 years ago. Ethan gripped the phone tighter. How is that possible? I don't know yet. Liam admitted. But I dug a little deeper and found something strange. All her identification documents, birth certificate, driver's license, were issued 5 years ago in Kansas City. But there's no record of her living there before that. Whoever she is, someone's gone to great lengths to bury her past. Ethan's mind raced. Could it be Maddie? I can't say for sure. Liam replied cautiously. But it's suspicious. I'll keep digging. After the call, Ethan sat in silence, staring out at the Chicago skyline. If Emma's past had truly been erased, it meant someone had a reason to hide her. But why? And more importantly, how was she connected to Maddie? That evening, Ethan returned to Bellevue, his heart pounding as he entered the familiar dining room. The polished floors gleamed under the dim light, and the hum of conversation filled the air. He scanned the room, searching for Emma. When he spotted her at the far end of the restaurant, his chest tightened. This time, he couldn't just watch from a distance. As Emma approached his table to take his order, Ethan felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. Emma, he said softly, his voice careful. Can we talk? She blinked, clearly caught off guard. Sir, please. Ethan pressed, lowering his voice. Just for a moment. I promise I won't take much of your time. Emma hesitated, glancing around nervously. I don't think my manager would like that. I'll make it quick. Ethan assured her. I just have a question. Reluctantly, she nodded and gestured toward a quieter corner of the restaurant. Ethan followed her, his pulse racing. Once they were alone, he studied her face, searching for answers in her eyes. What's this about? Emma asked, crossing her arms defensively. Ethan took a deep breath. That scar on your hand, where did you get it? Emma's eyes widened briefly, but she quickly masked her reaction. Why do you care? Because my wife had the same scar, Ethan said, his voice heavy with emotion. She's been gone for 10 years. But when I saw you, I couldn't help but notice the resemblance. Please, Emma, just tell me the truth. Emma's posture stiffened, and she looked away, her expression guarded. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. "This scar, it's just an accident from years ago." "Years ago?" Ethan pressed. "How many years?" Emma shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't remember. Look, I don't know your wife. And I don't know why you're asking me this. I'm just a waitress." Ethan studied her, frustration bubbling inside him. But he knew pushing her further wouldn't help. "I'm sorry," he said finally, stepping back. "I didn't mean to upset you." Emma nodded quickly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's fine. I should get back to work." As she walked away, Ethan's mind churned with questions. She had dodged his question about the scar's origin, and her defensiveness only deepened his suspicions. Something wasn't right. Back in his penthouse, Ethan poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat by the window, the city lights glittering below him. Emma wasn't just a waitress. Her past was too neatly erased, her answers too carefully constructed. But if she truly was Maddie or connected to her, why was she hiding? For the first time in years, Ethan felt a flicker of something other than grief, determination. He would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. The days following Ethan's encounter with Emma were restless. The mystery surrounding her consumed him. He replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, dissecting every word and gesture. She was hiding something, he was certain of it. But what? And why? Liam Carter, the investigator, called again with another update. This time, his tone was more serious, laced with a hint of urgency. "Ethan, I've found a few more pieces to the puzzle," Liam began. "But I'm going to need your discretion here. This is bigger than I expected." Ethan leaned back in his chair, gripping the phone tightly. "What is it?" "There's no record of Emma Daniels before 5 years ago, as I mentioned. But her records after that aren't exactly straightforward either. The social security number she uses was issued around the same time as her other documents, brand new. Like someone created an identity from scratch. And the name doesn't match any prior entries in any database." Ethan frowned. "So, she's not just a waitress with a mysterious past. Someone deliberately erased her previous life." "Exactly," Liam confirmed. "And here's the kicker, there's no evidence she's ever had any family or significant connections. It's like she appeared out of thin air." The implications hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. If Emma's life had been fabricated, it meant someone had the power and the motive to make it happen. But what was she running from? Or, worse, who was protecting her? "Keep digging," Ethan said firmly. "I need answers, Liam. No matter how far this goes." After the call ended, Ethan paced the room, his mind whirring with possibilities. He thought of Maddie, her laughter, the warmth in her eyes, and the scar they both shared from that fateful trip to the mountains. That scar had been their secret, a permanent bond. Emma had the same scar, the same air of quiet strength and sadness. But the woman he'd spoken to at Bellevue seemed fragile, as if her very existence was held together by threads. The next morning, Liam sent Ethan a dossier of everything he had uncovered so far. Ethan pored over the information, his frustration mounting with every page. The trail led nowhere. Every clue seemed to dissolve into more questions. But then one detail caught his eye, a note in Emma's medical history. 5 years ago, she had been admitted to a hospital in Kansas City with severe injuries. The record stated that she had been found unconscious on the side of a rural highway, with no identification or belongings. She had no memory of who she was or where she came from. Ethan's breath caught. Could that have been Maddie? Could his wife have survived the car accident he thought had claimed her life? The idea was staggering, almost impossible to believe. But if Emma truly was Maddie, how had she ended up there? And why hadn't she reached out to him? Ethan felt a surge of urgency. He needed to see Emma again. That evening, he returned to Bellevue. The restaurant was bustling, but Ethan's focus was unwavering. He spotted Emma near the bar, her expression distant as she cleared tables and carried trays. She moved with a grace that seemed almost practiced. Yet there was a weariness in her posture that hadn't been there before. When she approached his table, she hesitated, clearly recognizing him. "You're back," she said softly, her voice tinged with apprehension. Ethan nodded. "I'm sorry if I upset you the last time we spoke. But I need to talk to you again. Please." Emma glanced around, her brow furrowing. "I told you. I don't know anything about your wife. I think you've made a mistake." "Maybe I have," Ethan said, his tone gentle. "But maybe I haven't. Emma, I don't mean to pry into your life. But I can't ignore what I've seen, the scar. The way you remind me of her. If there's even the slightest chance." She looked away, her hands trembling as she adjusted the tray she was holding. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I can't help you." Before Ethan could say more, another waitress called for Emma, and she hurried off, leaving him with a sinking feeling of defeat. But there was something in her eyes, something vulnerable, almost pleading, that gave him hope. She knew more than she was letting on. He was certain of it. The breakthrough came later that night when Liam called again. "I tracked down a lead," Liam said. "It's not much, but it's something." Emma was taken in by a man named Brody after her hospital stay. He claimed to be her partner, but I ran a background check on him. And let's just say he's got a history of shady dealings. Ethan's stomach tightened. What kind of shady dealings? Fraud. Coercion. Ties to organized crime. And get this, he has a connection to Harvey Sinclair. Ethan stiffened at the name. Harvey Sinclair was a name he knew well, a powerful figure in the underworld with a reputation for ruthlessness. He'd tangled with Sinclair once during a corporate deal gone wrong. And the man had made it clear he played by his own rules. "What does Sinclair have to do with Emma?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Liam replied. "But if Brody's involved, it's not a coincidence. My guess, Emma, or whoever she really is, knows something valuable. Enough to make Sinclair and Brody go to great lengths to keep her hidden." Ethan's resolve hardened. If Sinclair and Brody were involved, Emma was in danger. Whether she was Maddie or not, he couldn't stand by and let her be a pawn in their game. "I'll protect her," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Whatever it takes." Emma Daniels sat in the corner of her small apartment, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. Her hands trembled as she turned the small gold pendant over in her fingers. Engraved on its surface were the words, "For Grace. With love. Mom." The inscription had stirred something deep within her, an ache she couldn't name. A feeling she couldn't explain. Who was Grace? Emma clenched the pendant tightly, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. She had found it earlier that day while cleaning out an old box Brody had insisted she never touch. Brody had always been controlling, dictating where she could go, who she could talk to, and even what she could keep. But this time, curiosity had overridden her fear. The moment she saw the pendant, a wave of emotion surged through her, leaving her breathless. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Brody's heavy footsteps approaching. She quickly shoved the pendant into her pocket, her heart racing as the door to the apartment swung open. Brody's broad frame filled the doorway, his face twisted into a scowl. "You've been acting strange lately," he said, his voice low and edged with suspicion. "What are you hiding?" Emma stood, trying to compose herself. "I'm not hiding anything," she replied, her voice trembling. Brody narrowed his eyes, taking a step closer. "Don't lie to me. I know you've been digging where you shouldn't." "I'm not lying," she said, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "I've just been tired from work." Brody studied her for a long moment before finally backing off. "You'd better not be lying," he muttered. "You know I've always looked out for you. Without me, you'd have nothing." Emma swallowed hard, nodding silently as Brody retreated to the kitchen. His words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they reminded her of how trapped she was. For years, she had relied on him, believing his story that he had saved her from a life she couldn't remember. But now, with the pendant burning a hole in her pocket and fragments of unfamiliar memories swirling in her mind, doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. That night, Emma waited until Brody was asleep before slipping out of the apartment. The streets of Kansas City were quiet, the distant hum of traffic the only sound. She walked aimlessly, her thoughts racing. Who was Grace? Was she connected to the life she couldn't remember? And why had Brody hidden the pendant? Her feet carried her to a small park. She sat on a bench, staring at the pendant under the pale glow of a street lamp. Flashes of images flickered in her mind, a child's laughter, the sound of waves crashing, the warmth of someone's embrace. The memories felt like whispers from another life, one she couldn't quite grasp. Tears welled up in her eyes. She had spent 5 years living in a fog, accepting the life Brody had given her because it was the only one she knew. But now, the cracks in that illusion were widening, and the truth, whatever it was calling to her. The sound of her phone vibrating pulled her out of her thoughts. She fished it out of her pocket and saw a name she hadn't expected, Ethan Hayes. Her hand shook as she hesitated, then answered the call. Emma. Ethan's voice came through, steady but tinged with urgency. Are you all right? She didn't know how to respond. Why are you calling me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I think you're in danger, Ethan said. I've been looking into your past. And I know about Brody. I know about Sinclair. Emma's breath caught. How do you know about them? Because I've dealt with Sinclair before, Ethan replied. He's not someone you want to be tangled up with. Emma. I don't know everything yet. But I think there's more to your story than you realize. Her grip on the phone tightened. Why do you care? You don't even know me. There was a pause before Ethan spoke again. Because I think you might be someone I lost a long time ago. Someone I've been searching for. Emma's heart raced. You're wrong, she said quickly. I'm not who you think I am. Maybe, Ethan said gently. But if there's even a chance. Please. Emma. Let me help you. Emma looked down at the pendant in her hand, her vision blurred by tears. She didn't know if she could trust Ethan, but she knew she couldn't keep living in the dark. Okay, she whispered. What do you want me to do? Meet me tomorrow, Ethan said. Somewhere safe. Away from Brody. We'll figure this out together. After ending the call, Emma sat on the bench for a long time, staring up at the night sky. The fear in her heart was undeniable. But so was the spark of hope. For the first time in years, she felt like she was taking control of her life. The next morning, Emma left the apartment early, careful not to wake Brody. She made her way to a quiet cafe Ethan had suggested, her heart pounding with every step. When she arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting in a corner booth. He looked up as she approached, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and determination. Emma, he said, standing as she sat across from him. Thank you for coming. She met his gaze, her hands clasped tightly on the table. If you're right about Brody and Sinclair, what happens next? Ethan leaned forward, his expression resolute. We find out the truth about who you are and we protect you from whatever they're hiding. The cafe was quiet, a haven of calm against the chaos brewing in Emma's life. Ethan sat across from her, his piercing eyes locked onto hers, radiating both determination and concern. Emma, clutching the gold pendant in her trembling hands, struggled to make sense of her emotions. For years, her life had been a haze of routine and submission. But now, in the span of a single day, that haze was lifting to reveal something darker and far more dangerous. Ethan's voice broke the silence. Emma, I need you to trust me. I know you're scared. And I know this is overwhelming. But if what I've uncovered is true, you're in more danger than you realize. She looked down at the pendant, its delicate engraving shimmering under the cafe's warm light. The name Grace echoed in her mind. stirring fragments of memories she couldn't quite piece together. Danger, she murmured, her voice barely audible. I've lived with that feeling for so long. I don't even know what safety feels like anymore. Ethan leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. You deserve answers. You deserve freedom. Whatever Brody and Sinclair have done, whatever they're hiding, we're going to uncover it. But I need to know, what do you remember about the last 5 years? Emma sighed, her eyes clouding with confusion. Not much. Brody told me I was in an accident, that I had no memory of who I was or where I came from. He said he found me in a hospital in Kansas City, that he helped me rebuild my life. She paused, her fingers gripping the pendant tighter. But I've always felt like something was missing. Like I wasn't supposed to be this person. Ethan nodded, his expression grim. That's because Brody didn't save you. He trapped you. Liam, my investigator, found records of your hospital stay. You were brought in unconscious, with no ID, no belongings. Brody showed up days later, claiming to be your partner. But there's no evidence to support his story. Emma's heart sank. Then why did they let him take me? Ethan's jaw tightened. Because Harvey Sinclair was involved. He has connections everywhere, money, influence. He could make any story believable. My guess is Brody was working for him even then. The weight of Ethan's words hit her like a tidal wave. The man she had relied on, who had claimed to protect her, had been lying to her all along. Her entire life, everything she thought she knew, was built on a foundation of deceit. Ethan's voice softened. Emma, there's something else. Sinclair has been linked to my family before. He and my brother, Vincent, were partners in several illegal dealings. If they're involved in your past, then this isn't just about you, it's about power, control, and silencing anyone who threatens their empire. Emma's breath caught. But why me? Why would they go to such lengths to hide my identity? Ethan hesitated before pulling a small leather journal from his bag. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward her. I think this might have some of the answers. She opened the journal cautiously, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting that filled its pages. The words blurred as her heart raced. But one passage stopped her cold. If anything happens to me, Ethan, promise me you'll protect Grace. She's our hope, our everything. And never, ever trust Vincent. Emma's fingers brushed over the ink, her breath hitching. Who wrote this? Maddie. Ethan said quietly. My wife. The woman I thought I lost 10 years ago. Her eyes filled with tears. You think I'm her? Ethan nodded. I do. The scar. The pendant. The way you speak. Move, it's all there. But more than that. The timing fits. 5 years ago, when Brody claimed he found you, was the same time Maddie disappeared. I think Vincent and Sinclair orchestrated the entire thing to silence her. Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. But I don't remember. I don't remember you. Or Grace. Or anything. That's not your fault. Ethan said gently. They took your memories from you. They built a new identity to keep you hidden. To keep you from exposing whatever it was Maddie you had discovered. Emma closed the journal, her hands trembling. She wanted to deny it, to push away the weight of his words. But deep down, something clicked into place. The pendant, the scar, the fractured memories, they all pointed to a truth she wasn't ready to face. What do we do now? She asked, her voice shaky. Ethan's expression hardened. We fight back. Liam is digging deeper into Sinclair and Brody. But we need more. I think Vincent is still pulling the strings. And I need to confront him. Emma froze. No. If Vincent is as dangerous as you say, then confronting him will only make things worse. Maybe. Ethan admitted. But he's hiding Grace. That much I'm sure of. And if we're going to bring her back, I need to know where she is. Emma's heart twisted at the mention of Grace. The name she couldn't shake. The child who felt so real and yet so distant. If she's out there, we have to find her. Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. We will. But I need you to trust me. This won't be easy, and it won't be safe. But I promise you. Emma, Maddie, I won't let them hurt you again. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, trembling thing. But hope nonetheless. Together, they would face the darkness. Together, they would uncover the truth. The next morning, Emma stood in the small kitchen of Ethan's house, staring out the window at the garden beyond. The sunlight streamed through the glass, warming her face. But it did little to ease the storm inside her. Ethan had given her space to process the revelations of the day before, but the questions swirling in her mind refused to settle. Who was she? Could she truly be Maddie Hayes, the woman Ethan had loved and lost? And if so, what had they done to her? The sound of footsteps pulled her back to the present. Ethan entered the kitchen, his expression weary but resolute. Morning, he said softly, setting a steaming mug of coffee on the table in front of her. Emma turned to him, offering a faint smile. Morning. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken thoughts heavy between them. Finally, Ethan spoke. I've been thinking about our next steps. We need to act quickly, before Vincent realizes we're onto him. Emma frowned, gripping the edge of the counter. And what does acting quickly mean? Charging in without a plan? That sounds more like a suicide mission. Ethan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. We have a plan, at least. Part of one. Liam's working on tracking down the exact location where Vincent's been keeping Grace. But I also need to confront Vincent. He's the key to everything. Emma shook her head, panic rising in her chest. You don't understand how dangerous this is. If what you've told me about Vincent is true, he won't hesitate to hurt you, or worse. Ethan's jaw tightened. I know the risks. But if we don't stop him, he'll keep coming for us. For you. For Grace. The mention of Grace sent a pang of guilt through Emma's heart. She wanted to protect the child she couldn't even remember. But fear paralyzed her. I don't even know her, she whispered. How can I protect her when I don't even know if I'm her mother? Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady and sure. You are her mother. Emma. Whether or not you remember, that bond is real. And you're stronger than you think. His words brought tears to her eyes. But she fought to keep them at bay. She didn't feel strong, she felt broken, lost, and terrified. But Ethan's unwavering determination lit a small spark of courage in her. Okay, she said finally, her voice trembling. What do you need me to do? Ethan gave her a faint smile, his relief palpable. Just stay safe for now. Liam and I will handle Vincent. Later that day, Ethan sat in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of Kansas City, waiting. The place was nearly empty, save for a few patrons nursing their drinks at the counter. Ethan's focus remained on the entrance, his tension building with every passing second. When the door finally opened, Vincent Hayes stepped inside. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his demeanor exuding confidence and control. But Ethan knew his brother too well. Beneath the polished exterior lay a dangerous man who would stop at nothing to protect his empire. Vincent spotted Ethan immediately, his lips curling into a faint smirk. He approached the table, pulling out a chair and sitting down with an air of arrogance. Ethan, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. To what do I owe the pleasure? Ethan leaned forward, his gaze cold and unyielding. You know why I called you here? Vincent chuckled, shaking his head. Ah. Still playing the hero. Are we? Always so predictable. I want to know where Grace is. Ethan said, his voice sharp. And I want to know what you've done to Maddie. Vincent's expression darkened, the smirk disappearing. You mean Emma, don't you? He said smoothly. Or should I say, the woman you think is Maddie? Ethan's hands clenched into fists under the table. Cut the games. Vincent. I know what you've been doing, working with Sinclair. Erasing Maddie's identity. Keeping Grace hidden. It's over. Vincent leaned back in his chair, regarding Ethan with a mixture of amusement and disdain. You think you've figured it all out, don't you? Let me give you a piece of advice. Little brother, you're playing a game you can't win. Ethan's anger flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. We'll see about that. I have evidence of your dealings with Sinclair enough to bring you both down. And when the police get their hands on it, you'll lose everything. Vincent's eyes narrowed, his calm facade beginning to crack. You think the police will stop me? You're more naive than I thought. Sinclair and I built this empire together, and you're just a bitter fool trying to tear it down. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. This isn't just about the company, Vincent. This is about Maddie. This is about Grace. And no matter what it takes, I will bring them home. For a moment, Vincent said nothing, his gaze locked with Ethan's. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. You're in over your head, Ethan. But I'll admit, it's entertaining to watch you try. With that, Vincent stood, smoothing out his suit. Enjoy your little crusade, brother. I'll be waiting to see how it all falls apart. As Vincent walked away, Ethan's resolve hardened. His brother's arrogance only fueled his determination. He would find Grace. He would bring Maddie Emma back to herself. And he would make Vincent pay for everything he had done. Emma sat alone in Ethan's study, the journal resting in her lap. The room was dimly lit, and the shadows danced across the walls as the evening settled in. The words on the page blurred as tears filled her eyes. But she couldn't stop reading. Maddie's handwriting, her own handwriting. If what Ethan believed was true, told a story of love, fear, and sacrifice. It was a voice from the past. Yet it resonated deeply within her, pulling at threads of memories she couldn't fully grasp. She traced a finger over a passage. Grace smiled at me today, her little hands reaching for mine. It reminded me why I have to stay strong. For her. For Ethan. If anything happens to me, I need them to know how much I loved them, how much I wanted to protect them. Emma's hand trembled. Was this her voice? Was this her life? She had spent years believing she was someone else. Her memories erased and her identity rewritten. Now, faced with the truth, or at least the possibility of it, she felt like a stranger in her own skin. A soft knock at the door startled her. She quickly closed the journal and wiped her eyes. Come in, she said, her voice shaky. Liam, Ethan's trusted investigator, entered the room, a file folder in hand. His presence was steady, almost reassuring. I thought you might want to see this, he said, placing the folder on the desk. It's what I've been able to dig up on Sinclair and Brody. Emma hesitated before opening the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and reports that painted a chilling picture. Brody's controlling behavior, his connection to Sinclair, and the lengths they had gone to in order to isolate her were all laid bare. One photo in particular caught her attention, a grainy image of a young girl, her curly hair framing a small, solemn face. Grace, Emma whispered, her chest tightening. She traced the outline of the photo, her heart aching. This is her, isn't it? Liam nodded. That's her. Taken at the boarding school where Sinclair and Vincent have been keeping her. Ethan and I believe they're planning to move her soon. Which means we're running out of time. Emma closed the folder, her resolve hardening. We can't let that happen. She's just a child. She deserves better than this. Liam studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Ethan's risking everything to bring her home. But I think you already know that. Emma nodded. I do. And I won't let him face this alone. Later that night, Emma joined Ethan in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, a map spread out on the coffee table in front of him. His focus was intense, but it softened when he noticed her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head and sat down beside him. "I've been thinking about Grace. About everything you've told me." Ethan waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. "I don't remember her," Emma admitted, her voice trembling. "But when I look at her picture, I feel something. Like a part of me recognizes her." Ethan reached out, placing a comforting hand on hers. "You're her mother, Emma. That bond doesn't just disappear, no matter what they've done to you." Emma looked down, tears threatening to spill. "What if I can't be the mother she needs? What if I'm too broken?" "You're not broken," Ethan said firmly. "You're strong. Stronger than you realize. And Grace doesn't need perfection, she just needs you." His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and steady. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Fragile but real. She met his gaze, her eyes shining with determination. "Then we'll find her. We'll bring her home." Ethan nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Together. The next morning, the house buzzed with quiet but determined energy. Ethan and Liam worked on finalizing their plan, while Emma prepared herself for what was to come. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The scar on her hand, the one that had first caught Ethan's attention, seemed to glisten under the soft light. "I am Maddie," she whispered to herself, testing the words. They felt foreign, like trying on a coat that didn't quite fit. But she said them again, louder this time. "I am Maddie." Her reflection didn't argue. Instead, it stared back at her with quiet resolve. When she rejoined Ethan and Liam, they were huddled over a blueprint of the boarding school. Liam pointed to a side entrance. "This is the weak spot. Minimal security, and it leads directly to the dorms." Ethan nodded. "We'll go in after dark. Quiet. Fast. No unnecessary risks." Emma stepped closer, her voice steady. "I'm coming with you." Ethan looked up sharply. "Emma. No. It's too dangerous. She's my daughter." "Ethan," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need to be there. She needs to see me, to know that I'm real." Liam glanced between them, his expression neutral. "She has a point," he said quietly. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Fine. But you stay close to me. No heroics." Emma nodded, her heart pounding. The fear was still there, clawing at the edges of her resolve. But she pushed it aside. For Grace. For Ethan. And for herself. She had to see this through. As night fell, they prepared to leave. Emma stood by the door, clutching the pendant around her neck. It was a symbol of her past, her present, and the future she was determined to reclaim. Ethan approached her, his presence grounding her. "Ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "Ready." The dark forest surrounding the boarding school seemed to close in around them as Ethan, Emma, and Liam crept through the underbrush. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy above, leaving them to rely on the faint glow of Liam's handheld map device to guide their way. Every crunch of leaves beneath their boots sounded deafening in the silence. But they pressed on, their breaths shallow and their nerves taut. Emma's heart pounded as she followed close behind Ethan, her hand clutching the pendant around her neck. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Somewhere beyond the looming walls of the school was Grace, her daughter. The thought made her both terrified and resolute. No matter the danger, she wouldn't turn back now. Liam stopped suddenly, raising his hand in a silent signal. They crouched low, hidden in the shadows of the forest, as he pointed toward a section of the wall ahead. "There," he whispered, barely audible. "The security cameras are on a loop. We have 5 minutes to get through." Ethan nodded, glancing at Emma to ensure she understood. She gave a quick nod in return, her jaw set with determination. Together, they moved toward the wall, their movements swift but cautious. When they reached the base, Liam pulled out a compact set of tools and began working on the latch of the side gate. The faint click of metal against metal was the only sound in the stillness. Emma's pulse raced with every passing second, her mind conjuring images of what might happen if they were caught. She forced herself to breathe deeply, focusing on the task at hand. The gate creaked softly as it swung open, and Liam gestured for them to enter. They slipped inside, their footsteps muffled against the grass. The dormitory building loomed ahead, its windows dark and its facade imposing. Ethan led the way, his posture tense but controlled. Emma followed, her senses hyper-aware of every shadow, every movement. When they reached the dormitory door, Liam produced another set of tools, expertly bypassing the lock. As the door clicked open, Ethan turned to Emma. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice firm but kind. She nodded, gripping his arm for a brief moment before stepping inside. The hallway was dimly lit, the air thick with the sterile scent of cleaning products. It felt eerily quiet, like a place suspended in time. Liam motioned for them to follow as he checked the map on his device. "Her room should be on the second floor," he murmured. They ascended the staircase as quietly as possible, every creak of the wood beneath their feet making Emma wince. When they reached the second floor, Liam pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was it. Ethan approached the door cautiously, pressing his ear against it to listen. After a moment, he nodded to Liam, who began picking the lock. Emma's hands clenched into fists, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. She focused on the pendant around her neck, drawing strength from its weight. The door opened with a faint click, and Ethan stepped inside. Emma followed, her heart pounding. The room was small and sparsely furnished, a single bed, a desk, and a stuffed toy resting on the pillow. And there, curled up under a thin blanket, was Grace. Emma froze, her breath hitching. The sight of her daughter, so small and vulnerable, sent a wave of emotion crashing over her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Ethan knelt beside the bed, gently shaking Grace's shoulder. "Grace," he whispered softly. The little girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked groggily, her gaze landing on Ethan. "Daddy," she mumbled, her voice filled with confusion and hope. Emma's knees gave way, and she sank to the floor beside Ethan. Grace's eyes shifted to her, widening with surprise. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sweetheart. It's me." Grace sat up, her small hands reaching out hesitantly. Emma pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if she might disappear. Grace clung to her, her tiny body shaking with quiet sobs. "I missed you," she murmured, her voice muffled against Emma's shoulder. "I missed you too," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "So much." Ethan placed a hand on Grace's back, his expression soft and full of love. "We're taking you home, Grace. You're safe now." But the moment of relief was short-lived. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway, followed by muffled voices. Liam's head snapped toward the door, his expression darkening. "We've got company," he said tersely. Ethan stood, his jaw tightening. "Take Grace and go," he said to Emma. "Liam and I will hold them off." "No," Emma said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "We're in this together." Ethan hesitated, torn between protecting her and respecting her resolve. But the decision was made for them as the door burst open, revealing two armed guards. Liam moved quickly, disarming one of them with a swift strike, while Ethan tackled the other. The room erupted into chaos. Emma shielded Grace, pulling her close as the fight continued. The guards were strong, but Ethan and Liam's determination gave them the upper hand. When the guards were finally subdued, Ethan turned to Emma, his expression urgent. "Go. Now," he said. Emma didn't argue. She scooped Grace into her arms and ran, her heart pounding as she navigated the maze of hallways. Ethan and Liam followed close behind, their footsteps echoing in unison. The exit was within sight when another alarm blared, red lights flashing through the corridors. "They know we're here," Liam shouted. "We need to move." Ethan grabbed Emma's hand, guiding her through the chaos. As they burst through the gate and into the forest, Emma held Grace tightly, her legs burning with effort. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they ran, the trees closing in around them like a protective shield. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Emma collapsed to her knees, clutching Grace to her chest. Ethan knelt beside her, his breathing heavy but steady. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were safe. Emma looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "We did it," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "We did." The safety of the forest was fleeting. As Emma, Ethan, Liam, and Grace regrouped near the edge of the dense woods, the harsh reality of their situation sank in. They had rescued Grace, but Vincent wouldn't rest until he had her back. The faint sound of dogs barking in the distance sent a shiver down Emma's spine, reminding them all that their time was running out. "We need to keep moving," Liam said, his voice steady but urgent. "They'll search the woods. If we're caught here, it's over." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on Emma's hand. He turned to Grace, who clung to her mother with wide, fearful eyes. "Grace, sweetheart, we're going to play a little game. Okay? We're going to run really fast and hide. Think you can do that?" Grace hesitated, her lip quivering. But Emma knelt to her level and gently smoothed her hair. "You're so brave, my love. Just hold my hand and stay close." "Okay." Grace nodded, her small voice trembling. "Okay, Mommy." They moved quickly through the forest, Liam leading the way as he scanned for threats. The moonlight guided their path, casting long shadows that danced around them. Emma focused on every step, determined not to stumble as she held Grace's hand tightly. She could feel Ethan's presence behind her, a constant source of strength even in the chaos. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a secluded clearing where a battered van was hidden beneath a canopy of branches. Liam pulled open the side door, gesturing for everyone to climb in. "This'll get us out of here," he said. "But we need to be quick. They'll figure out we've escaped soon enough." Emma helped Grace into the van and slid into the seat beside her. Ethan climbed in last, his gaze lingering on the forest as if he expected Vincent's men to appear at any moment. Liam started the engine, and the vehicle rumbled to life, jolting forward onto the uneven dirt path. As they drove, the tension in the air was palpable. Grace clung to Emma, her small frame trembling. Emma stroked her daughter's hair, whispering soothing words even as her own heart raced. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're safe now." Ethan reached over, placing a reassuring hand on Emma's knee. Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, the depth of their shared determination was clear. They would protect Grace at all costs. They arrived at a safe house on the outskirts of a quiet town just before dawn. The small, weathered cabin was surrounded by overgrown fields and towering trees, providing the perfect cover. Liam parked the van and stepped out, scanning the area for any signs of pursuit before giving the all-clear. Ethan carried Grace inside, while Emma followed, her body aching from the strain of the night. The cabin was modest, with only the bare necessities, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the danger they had just escaped. Emma sat on the worn couch with Grace curled up in her lap. The little girl had finally fallen asleep, her soft breaths a reminder of the innocence they were fighting to protect. Ethan crouched beside them, his hand gently brushing Grace's curls. "She's safe," Emma whispered, her voice filled with relief. "For now." Ethan nodded but didn't look away from Grace. "Vincent won't stop. You know that." Emma's heart sank at the truth of his words. She glanced at Liam, who stood near the window, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "What's our next move?" she asked. Liam turned, his expression grim. "We need to end this. Vincent won't back down. Not while he thinks he has the upper hand. We have to hit him where it hurts." Ethan straightened, his jaw set. "The evidence," he said. "The documents we found at the mansion and Sinclair's files. We take them to the authorities. Expose Vincent for everything he's done." "And Sinclair?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam hesitated. "He's slippery. He'll throw Vincent under the bus if it means saving himself. But he's just as dangerous. We'll have to tread carefully." Ethan reached for Emma's hand, his touch grounding her. "This ends now. For Grace. For all of us." Emma squeezed his hand, her resolve hardening. "I'm with you." The next day, they began piecing together their plan. Liam contacted a trusted ally within law enforcement, someone who could ensure the evidence wouldn't be buried by Vincent's influence. Meanwhile, Ethan worked with Emma to compile the files, their focus unwavering. As they sorted through the documents, Emma stumbled upon a letter tucked inside one of the folders. The handwriting was familiar, Maddie's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it, and the words hit her like a tidal wave. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to protect Grace the way I wanted to. I'm sorry. But I know you'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. She's everything to me. To us. Never let her forget how much she's loved." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she read the letter aloud. Ethan's expression softened, and he reached out to cup her cheek. "You're here now," he said gently. "That's what matters." Emma nodded, clutching the letter to her chest. She wouldn't let Vincent or Sinclair take anything else from her. This was her fight now, too. That night, as they prepared for the final step of their plan, Emma sat by Grace's bedside, watching her daughter sleep. She marveled at the peaceful expression on her face, a stark contrast to the chaos that had brought them here. Leaning down, Emma pressed a soft kiss to Grace's forehead. "I'll keep you safe," she whispered. "I promise." Ethan appeared in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the warm light of the hall. "It's time," he said. Emma rose, her heart steady with purpose. Together, they stepped into the night, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The quiet of the night was deceptive as Emma, Ethan, and Liam drove toward the location of their final confrontation. Vincent's web of lies, power, and cruelty had persisted long enough, and they were determined to unravel it once and for all. In the back seat, Emma clutched the folder of evidence tightly, its contents their strongest weapon against Vincent's empire. Every document, every transaction, and every name listed in the files was a piece of the puzzle that would bring him down. Ethan glanced at her, his grip firm on the steering wheel. "How are you holding up?" Emma's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I'm ready. We have to end this, for Grace." Liam, sitting in the passenger seat, turned to face them. "The moment we hand this over to Detective Carter, the clock starts ticking. Vincent will realize we're moving against him. He'll come after us with everything he's got." Emma took a deep breath. "Let him try. We've come too far to let fear stop us now." The safe house where they were meeting Detective Carter loomed ahead. A small, nondescript building surrounded by dense trees. The car rolled to a stop, and they stepped out, scanning the area for any signs of danger. Inside, Carter waited for them at a simple table, his sharp eyes betraying years of experience. He stood as they entered, extending a hand to Liam. "You've brought it?" Carter asked. Liam handed over the folder. "Everything's in there, proof of Vincent Reynolds' crimes, from embezzlement to illegal dealings with Harvey Sinclair. If this doesn't take him down, nothing will." Carter flipped through the pages, his expression grim. "This is damning. No doubt about it. But you're right, Vincent won't go quietly. He's got powerful allies who'll try to shield him. Emma stepped forward. Then we don't just stop at Vincent. We expose Sinclair too. He's just as guilty. And if we take them both down, their entire network collapses. Carter nodded. It's a solid plan. But we need to move fast. I'll take this to the DA and start the process. You three need to stay out of sight. Ethan frowned. What about Grace? She's our priority. We'll keep her safe. Carter assured him. I've arranged for a secure location. She'll be protected until this is over. Emma's heart sank at the thought of being separated from her daughter. But she knew it was the safest option. When will this all go public? She asked. Within the next 24 hours. Carter replied. Vincent won't have time to react. As they left the safe house, Emma couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every noise an approaching enemy. Ethan sensed her tension and reached for her hand. Squeezing it gently. We're doing the right thing, he said. This is the only way to keep Grace safe. I know. Emma murmured. I just can't stop thinking about what Vincent will do when he realizes he's losing. Liam chimed in from the front seat. He'll lash out. No question. But he's desperate now. Desperation makes people sloppy. We'll stay one step ahead. They drove back to the cabin, their nerves fraying with each passing mile. When they arrived, the night was eerily quiet. Emma hurried inside to check on Grace, finding her asleep in the small bedroom. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and Emma felt a pang of relief. She leaned down to kiss her daughter's forehead, whispering, I love you, my sweet girl. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his voice soft. We'll protect her, no matter what. Emma nodded, brushing away tears. She's the reason we have to win. The following day, news of Vincent's crimes broke across every major outlet. The evidence was irrefutable, and his reputation as a cunning and untouchable businessman crumbled. Images of the Reynolds Corporation headquarters swarmed with reporters filled the television screens, and the name Vincent Reynolds became synonymous with scandal. But as expected, Vincent didn't retreat quietly. That evening, as Emma, Ethan, and Liam strategized their next steps, the sound of approaching vehicles shattered the quiet of the cabin. Liam bolted to the window, his sharp intake of breath confirming their fears. They've found us. Emma's stomach twisted. What do we do? Ethan was already moving. We run. Grab Grace and head for the back trail. I'll slow them down. No. Emma protested. We do this together. Ethan stopped and placed his hands on her shoulders. Emma, listen to me. Grace needs you. She's our priority. I'll be right behind you. I promise. Emma hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. But the urgency in Ethan's voice forced her to act. She rushed to Grace's room, scooping her daughter into her arms. The little girl stirred, her voice groggy. Mommy, what's happening? Just a little game. Sweetheart. Emma whispered. We're going to hide. Liam led the way through the back door, guiding them toward the dense forest. Behind them, the sound of shouting and footsteps grew louder. Emma clutched Grace tightly, her heart pounding with every step. Ethan stayed behind, holding a makeshift barricade at the cabin door. He braced himself, knowing the odds were against him. But his mind was singularly focused, buying time for Emma and Grace. As they disappeared into the woods, Emma's breath came in ragged gasps. But she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. For Grace. She would keep running until her legs gave out. And then, she would crawl if she had to. The forest loomed dark and foreboding as Emma, Grace, and Liam sprinted deeper into its embrace. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their dense canopy blocking out most of the moonlight. Emma clutched Grace tightly, her arms trembling from the weight and strain. But she refused to stop. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot, mixed with the distant shouts of Vincent's men. Keep moving, Liam urged, his voice low but firm. He glanced over his shoulder. his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. They're not far behind. Grace whimpered softly, her small hands clutching Emma's shoulders. Mommy, I'm scared, she whispered, her voice trembling. Emma slowed for a brief moment, just long enough to kiss the top of her daughter's head. I know, my love. But I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you. Liam stopped ahead of them, pointing to a narrow path that veered off the main trail. This way, he said. It leads to a clearing where we can regroup. Emma nodded, her breathing labored, and followed him. She forced her legs to keep going, even as exhaustion threatened to take over. The shouts were growing louder, closer. Vincent's men were relentless, their pursuit fueled by their master's orders. They reached the clearing, a small, moonlit space surrounded by towering pines. Liam crouched, signaling for Emma to do the same. He pulled a compact radio from his pocket, speaking in hushed tones. Ethan, do you copy? We've made it to the clearing. What's your status? There was static, followed by Ethan's strained voice. I'm holding them off. Buy as much time as I can. Get them to safety. Emma's heart clenched at the sound of his voice, and she fought the urge to demand that he leave and join them. But she knew Ethan wouldn't abandon the fight, not if it meant protecting her and Grace. Stay safe, Liam said before cutting the connection. He turned to Emma. We need to keep moving. There's an old hunter's cabin not far from here. We can use it as a temporary refuge. Emma shifted Grace in her arms, her determination overriding her exhaustion. Let's go. They pushed on, the terrain growing rougher as they left the trail. The uneven ground was treacherous, and Emma stumbled more than once. But Liam was always there to steady her. Grace clung to her tightly, her quiet sobs breaking Emma's heart. Just a little further, Liam said, his voice steady and reassuring. Finally, the cabin came into view, a small, weathered structure nestled among the trees. Liam approached cautiously, his weapon drawn, and signaled for Emma to stay back. After a moment, he waved them forward. It's clear. Emma stepped inside, the cabin's musty air filling her lungs. It was a single-room shelter with a cot, a small table, and a wood stove. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung in the corners. But it was a haven compared to the chaos they had just escaped. Liam helped Emma settle Grace on the cot, covering her with a worn blanket. The little girl curled up, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. Is Daddy coming? She asked softly. Emma smoothed her hair, her voice gentle. Yes, sweetheart. He'll be here soon. Just rest for now. Grace nodded, her eyes fluttering closed. Emma sat beside her, her hand never leaving her daughter's. She looked up at Liam, her eyes filled with worry. Do you think Ethan will make it? Liam hesitated before answering, his expression guarded. Ethan's tough. If anyone can handle Vincent's men, it's him. But we need to be ready for anything. Emma nodded. Though her heart remained heavy, she felt helpless, torn between the need to protect Grace and the overwhelming fear for Ethan. Her mind raced with thoughts of what Vincent might do if he caught up to them. Liam moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. We've got maybe a couple of hours before they track us here. We'll need a plan. What kind of plan? Emma asked, her voice quiet. We hold our ground, Liam said simply. If they find us, we fight. We protect Grace at all costs. Emma's stomach churned at the thought of another confrontation. But she knew there was no other option. Vincent wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted, and running forever wasn't an option. As the minutes stretched into hours, the cabin grew eerily silent. The faint rustling of leaves outside was the only sound, and every creak of the wood sent a jolt of tension through Emma's body. She kept her eyes on Grace, drawing strength from the sight of her daughter's peaceful face. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine pierced the stillness. Emma's breath caught, and she exchanged a tense glance with Liam. He moved to the window, his jaw tightening, "They're here," he whispered. Emma's heart raced as she stood, clutching Grace protectively. Liam turned to her, his expression grim. "Stay in the corner with her. Don't move unless I tell you." Emma nodded, pulling Grace close. The little girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mommy, what's happening?" "Sure, my love," Emma whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." The sound of footsteps on the cabin's porch sent a wave of fear crashing over her. Liam braced himself, his weapon drawn. The door creaked open, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. A figure stepped inside, and Emma's heart leapt with both relief and disbelief. It was Ethan, his face smudged with dirt and his clothes torn, but his eyes were filled with determination. "You're okay," Emma breathed, tears streaming down her face. Ethan nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her and Grace. "We don't have much time. They're close." Liam closed the door behind him, securing it with a heavy piece of wood. "Then we make our stand here." As they prepared for the inevitable, Emma held Grace tightly, her resolve unshaken. They had come too far to give up now. Together, they would face whatever came next, and they would fight for their family. The cabin felt like a fragile shield against the storm that loomed outside. Every creak in the wooden structure seemed amplified, every rustle of leaves a warning. Emma, Ethan, and Liam exchanged tense glances, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. Grace, still groggy but awake, clung tightly to her mother, her small fingers gripping Emma's shirt as if letting go would bring the danger closer. Ethan crouched near the window, his sharp eyes scanning the dark forest beyond. "They're circling," he murmured, his voice low. "Vincent doesn't want to rush in without knowing what we've got planned." Liam checked his weapon, the metallic sound unnervingly loud in the small space. "That gives us time to set the terms." Emma sat with Grace on the cot, her mind racing. She felt the crushing weight of responsibility, the need to protect her daughter, the man she loved, and the fragile hope they'd fought so hard to preserve. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady. "We hold them off as long as we can. The police will need time to get here. And Carter promised backup. If we can keep them at bay. This ends tonight." Grace whimpered softly, burying her face in Emma's shoulder. "Mommy, I'm scared." Emma stroked her hair, whispering words of comfort. "I know, sweetheart. But Daddy's here. And Uncle Liam too. They won't let anything happen to us." Liam glanced at Ethan. "They'll come in waves. Vincent won't let his men take the brunt of this without some direction." Ethan nodded. "We stick to the plan. Emma, you stay in the corner with Grace. No matter what happens, don't move unless it's absolutely necessary." Emma hated the idea of hiding while they fought, but she knew her priority was Grace. "I understand," she said quietly, tightening her hold on her daughter. The first sign of Vincent's approach came with the unmistakable crunch of boots on the gravel path leading to the cabin. Ethan and Liam exchanged a look, then took their positions. Liam moved to the door, his weapon ready, while Ethan positioned himself near the window. The tension in the room was palpable, every breath heavy with anticipation. "Reynolds," a voice called out, loud and mocking. It was Vincent. "I know you're in there. You've got something that belongs to me, and I'm here to collect." Ethan didn't respond, his grip on his weapon tightening. Vincent's voice was smooth, confident. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Just hand over Grace, and we'll walk away. No one else has to get hurt." Emma felt a surge of anger rise within her. How dare he speak so casually about taking her daughter? She glanced at Ethan, whose jaw was clenched so tightly she thought he might snap. Liam smirked, calling back through the door, "You're awfully confident for a man with his back against the wall, Vincent." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "And you're awfully cocky for someone outnumbered and outgunned." Vincent replied, "Don't push me." Liam. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, with a crash, one of the cabin's windows shattered, and a smoke canister rolled inside, hissing and filling the room with a choking grey mist. Grace screamed, and Emma pulled her closer, shielding her face. "They're coming," Liam shouted, moving to cover the broken window. Ethan fired through the opening, the sharp cracks of gunfire punctuating the chaos. Emma huddled in the corner, her heart pounding as the sounds of the fight surrounded her. The first man through the window was met with a brutal blow from Liam, who swung the butt of his rifle with precision. The intruder crumpled to the floor, but another quickly followed, forcing Ethan and Liam into a fierce struggle to keep them out. "Stay down," Ethan yelled, his voice cutting through the haze. He fought with the intensity of a man who had everything to lose, his movements swift and purposeful. Emma held Grace tightly, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. "We're going to be okay, my love. Just keep your eyes closed." The cabin seemed to shrink as more of Vincent's men forced their way inside. The air was thick with smoke and adrenaline, every second stretching into an eternity. Emma's eyes darted between Ethan and Liam, silently willing them to hold the line. But then, amid the chaos, Vincent himself appeared in the doorway. He stood tall and composed, his face a mask of smug superiority. His cold eyes swept the room, landing on Emma and Grace. A twisted smile spread across his lips. "There you are," he said softly, his voice dripping with malice. "The star of the show." Ethan turned, his weapon trained on Vincent. "Don't you dare take another step." Vincent raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, Ethan. I'm just here to talk." "Talk?" Ethan spat. "You think there's anything left to say?" Vincent's smile widened. "Oh, there's plenty. But we'll save that for later. Right now, I'm here for my niece." Emma's blood ran cold. "She's not yours," she said fiercely, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. "You'll never take her." Vincent's expression darkened, his composure slipping for the first time. "You're in no position to make demands. Emma, hand her over." Or, he didn't finish. A shot rang out, and Vincent staggered, clutching his shoulder. Ethan stood, his weapon still aimed, his eyes blazing with fury. "You're done, Vincent," Ethan said, his voice low and deadly. "This ends now." Before Vincent could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air, cutting through the chaos like a beacon of hope. Vincent's men hesitated, their confidence faltering as the approaching police cars drew closer. Emma held Grace tighter, tears streaming down her face as relief washed over her. The nightmare wasn't over yet, but the tide was finally turning. As the sirens drew closer, the tension in the cabin shifted. Vincent's men hesitated, their confidence eroded by the blaring reminder of authority closing in. Ethan kept his weapon trained on Vincent, who clutched his bleeding shoulder but managed to maintain his menacing glare. "You think this is over?" Vincent hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You think a few cops will fix everything? You've already lost." Ethan's eyes burned with fury. "No, Vincent. You've lost. You just don't realize it yet." The pounding of boots on gravel signaled the arrival of the police. Flashlights pierced the smoky air, and authoritative voices called out, commanding everyone to stand down. Liam stepped back, lowering his weapon slightly, his breathing heavy but his stance ready for anything. Emma clutched Grace tightly in the corner, whispering soothing words as the little girl buried her face in her mother's chest. "It's almost over, sweetheart. We're safe now," she murmured, her voice trembling but resolute. The cabin door was flung open, and officers swarmed in, weapons drawn. "Freeze," one of them shouted, his voice echoing through the cramped space. Vincent's men dropped their weapons one by one, raising their hands in surrender. Their earlier bravado had dissipated, replaced by the grim realization that they were outmatched. Vincent, however, remained defiant. He straightened despite the blood staining his tailored suit, his dark eyes darting toward Ethan. "You think this makes you a hero?" he spat. "You're nothing, Ethan. Without me, you're just a man clinging to a broken family." Ethan didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his voice calm but filled with unshakable determination. "You destroyed everything you touched, Vincent. You tried to take Grace. You tried to erase Emma. And you thought you could control me. But this is where it ends." A police officer moved to restrain Vincent, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Vincent struggled, his face twisting with rage. "You'll regret this," he shouted, his voice breaking as the reality of his downfall set in. "You think you've won. But you'll always carry the weight of what you lost because of me." Ethan said nothing, his eyes never leaving Vincent's as the officers led him away. For a moment, the cabin was eerily quiet, the chaos replaced by the heavy weight of what had just transpired. Liam approached Ethan, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice soft. "You stood your ground." Ethan shook his head, his gaze shifting to Emma and Grace. "We did it. Together." Emma rose slowly, still holding Grace, and crossed the room to stand by Ethan. She looked into his eyes, her own filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything." Ethan reached out, gently touching Grace's cheek. "This isn't just my fight. It never was. It's ours." The officers began clearing the cabin, escorting Vincent's men into waiting vehicles. The scene outside was illuminated by flashing lights, a stark contrast to the dark events that had unfolded. As the last of the intruders were taken away, a sense of calm began to settle over the small family. The lead officer approached Ethan, his expression serious but kind. "Mr. Reynolds, you and your family are safe now. Vincent Reynolds and his associates will be facing a long list of charges. We'll need your statements. But for tonight, I suggest you take your family somewhere they can rest." Ethan nodded, his gratitude evident. "Thank you, officer. We'll do that." Liam lingered as the police finished their work, his protective instincts still on high alert. "I'll follow you back to the house," he said. "Just in case." Ethan offered him a small smile. "I appreciate it." As they left the cabin, the cool night air felt like a salve on Emma's frayed nerves. She breathed deeply, inhaling the crisp scent of pine and earth, grounding herself in the reality that they had survived. Grace had fallen asleep in her arms, her small body finally at peace after the harrowing ordeal. The drive back to their secluded home was silent but heavy with unspoken emotions. Ethan kept his focus on the road, but his hand occasionally brushed against Emma's, a silent reminder that they were in this together. Liam's car followed closely behind, a reassuring presence in the dark. When they arrived, the house was quiet and still, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for their return. Ethan carried Grace inside and gently laid her on the couch, covering her with a soft blanket. Emma watched him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "She's safe," Ethan said softly, standing beside Emma as they looked at their sleeping daughter. "You're both safe." Emma leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "It's because of you," she said. "You never gave up on us." Ethan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "And I never will." The weight of the past few weeks hung over them, but for the first time, it felt manageable. They had faced Vincent's wrath and emerged stronger, their love and determination unshaken. The road ahead would be long, filled with challenges as they pieced their lives back together. But they knew they would face it as a family. As the first rays of dawn broke through the curtains, bathing the room in soft light, Emma and Ethan sat side by side, holding hands. It wasn't the end of their story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. One defined not by fear or loss but by hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond they shared. The days following Vincent's arrest passed in a blur. For the first time in years, the constant shadow of fear seemed to lift, leaving room for a new kind of uncertainty, one that came with rebuilding their lives. The small house on the outskirts of town became their sanctuary, a safe haven far removed from the chaos they had left behind. Emma stood in the kitchen one morning, the golden light of dawn streaming through the window as she prepared breakfast. Grace's laughter floated in from the garden, where Ethan was helping her build a small birdhouse. The sound filled Emma's heart with a mix of relief and bittersweet joy. After everything they had endured, moments like these felt almost surreal. Her thoughts often drifted back to the warehouse, to the way Ethan had stood between them and Vincent, his resolve unshakable. She marveled at his strength, but she also saw the toll it had taken. He carried the weight of their survival as if it were his alone, even though they had all fought in their own way. When breakfast was ready, Emma stepped outside to call them in. Grace ran up first, her curly hair bouncing as she held up her paint-covered hands. "Look, Mommy, we're making it blue, just like the sky." Emma crouched down, smiling as she wiped some paint from Grace's cheek. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You and Daddy are doing an amazing job." Ethan followed, carrying the unfinished birdhouse. He set it down carefully on the porch and gave Emma a tired smile. "She's got a knack for this," he said, ruffling Grace's hair. "She's already talking about building a treehouse next." Emma laughed softly, standing to meet his gaze. "Thank you for this," she said, her voice laced with emotion, for giving her back a sense of normalcy. Ethan shook his head. "It's not just for her. It's for all of us. We need this." They sat together at the small kitchen table, sharing a quiet breakfast. Grace chatted away about her plans for the birdhouse, her excitement infectious. For a while, the lingering shadows of their past seemed to fade, replaced by the simple joy of being together. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks beneath the surface began to show. At night, Grace would wake up crying, her small body trembling as she clung to Emma. The nightmares came less frequently than before, but they still held a grip on her young mind. Emma would hold her close, whispering reassurances, even as her own fears resurfaced. Ethan, too, struggled with the weight of their experiences. He spent long hours in the yard or the workshop, throwing himself into projects as a way to quiet his restless thoughts. Emma often found him staring into the distance, his jaw clenched, as if he were still bracing for a fight. One evening, after Grace had fallen asleep, Emma found him sitting on the porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The cool night air carried the faint scent of pine, and the stars shone brightly above. She sat beside him, her presence gentle but insistent. "You don't have to carry this alone. You know," she said softly, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her, his expression weary. "I know. But it's hard not to. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering if I could have done something different, something that would have spared you and Grace from all of this." Emma reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "You did everything you could. You saved us, Ethan. And now we have to save each other." He nodded slowly, his grip on her hand tightening. "It's just hard to move on, knowing how close we came to losing everything." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I think the hardest part is accepting that the scars will always be there. But they don't have to define us. We've survived, Ethan. That's what matters." The following day, Emma decided to enroll in an art therapy program at the local community center. She had always loved painting, and it seemed like the perfect outlet for the emotions she had been carrying. Her first session was tentative, her brush strokes hesitant as she tried to translate her pain onto the canvas. But as the days went by, the process became a lifeline, a way to express what words couldn't. Ethan found his own solace in helping the community. He volunteered at a local shelter, using his skills to rebuild homes and mentor at-risk youth. It gave him a sense of purpose, a way to channel his energy into something positive. Grace, meanwhile, began to rediscover the carefree joy of childhood. She started school again, making friends and coming home with stories that made Emma and Ethan smile. Her laughter became a constant presence in their home, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Grace climbed onto Ethan's lap, holding a piece of paper she had been working on. "Look, Daddy, it's us." Ethan took the drawing, his heart swelling as he looked at the crayon depiction of their family. The three of them stood hand in hand, surrounded by a bright yellow sun and a field of flowers. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Grace beamed. "We're happy now, right?" Emma leaned in, wrapping her arms around them both. "Yes, sweetheart. We're happy. And we're together. That's all that matters." As the night settled around them, the family sat in their small, cozy home, the weight of their past still present but no longer suffocating. They had found a way forward, not without pain, but with a strength born of love and resilience. And for the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to believe in the possibility of peace. As the sun set over their peaceful countryside home, Emma, Ethan, and Grace sat together on the porch, their laughter blending with the gentle rustle of leaves. The journey they had endured was etched into their hearts, a testament to the strength of love and the resilience of the human spirit. Though the scars of their past remained, they no longer defined their future. Through hope, determination, and unity, they rebuilt their lives one moment at a time. Grace's laughter filled the house once more. Ethan found purpose in helping others, and Emma's art became a beautiful expression of healing and renewal. Together, they created a new chapter, a life anchored in love and guided by the lessons of their struggles. As they held each other under the evening sky, they knew that life would never be perfect, but it could still be beautiful. Their bond, forged in hardship, was unbreakable, and their story was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, love can light the way. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales that touch the soul and celebrate the beauty of resilience and hope. See you in the next story.